So, welcome to the Food Yoga Nutrition Talks, where we talk about how nutrition is important in one's yoga practice. Myself, Shelly, a yogi at Sattviko, and today we have Ivette, who is a MBA by qualification, and not just that, she is a certified health coach. She is a certified yoga teacher. She is a certified culinary chef, and also she is a certified Reiki healer. She's also a well known author and a speaker too. I hope I've not missed anything, Ivette.
No, you've covered that very well. Thank you. Just would like to add that my focus is on Ayurveda, which is the sister science to yoga.
Okay. So welcome to the show, Ivette. I
Thank you.
hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, Yvette. Yeah.
Yvette. Okay. So, there's a lot to talk about. But firstly, we would like to know about your yogic journey, as in what motivated you to take up yoga and how have been your journey on this path so far?
Yeah. So I have been practicing yoga probably over 12 years. Probably about 10 years ago, I found myself facing almost chronic fatigue, osteoarthritis, and a thyroid condition. And prior to that, I was an avid runner. Upon that diagnosis, I was told that I would have to take many medications, and I didn't want to choose that route. So I just decided to take complementary modalities. I was fortunate enough to have practitioners around me who were able to support me. And I was told that I would have to go on medication for the rest of my life, and I avoided that through lifestyle changes. And one of those changes that I made was really becoming more deeply involved with my yoga practice. I was living a very busy lifestyle. I was working, I was a mom. My husband traveled a lot. So I was taking care of many different things and multitasking. And so I felt pulled in many different directions, not only from a physical perspective, but from a mental perspective as well. And I didn't feel very grounded in my body. And I found when I went to yoga, initially it was around physical practice. And after getting on the mat and experiencing the pranayama, the asanas, and the spiritual connection, I really felt very different in my body, very different than I had ever felt before. And so I began the yoga practice, and it became a daily part of how I lived, and it helped in partial how I healed, in addition to making a lot of lifestyle changes besides that and creating a little bit more balance in my life. But yoga was a big part of that.
So you mentioned that you were in sports before that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was a big runner. And I did a lot of boot camps. Most of my focus was on cardio type of exercises. And that's how, from more of a Western perspective, I thought, I have to burn calories. And the way that I do that was to, go and run, do boot camps, do aerobics classes. I'm dating myself now because aerobics doesn't really exist anymore, but that kind of thing. And so yoga was a practice that I avoided. I also avoided it because I didn't like to be still in my mind and my body. And so as I began the practice of yoga, I realized how I was changing in my mental patterns, how I was able to use the breath to calm my body and my mind and the thoughts.
Okay, that's wonderful. It's quite interesting to know that a person who was avoiding yoga before and was into the sports to take care of her fitness regime turned into a yoga as a full-time approach, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. So let's just talk about the nutrition, which is a very less talked about topic. As in, when we talk about yoga, we talk about asanas, pranayam, meditation, but nutrition is a bit less talked topic on the yoga aspect. So I would like to know your views. How do you see that nutrition is important in one's yogic practice?
Well, I see it's interesting because my journey to health was really changing the way that I ate. And initially, when I began to heal my body and I was able to do that, for me, it was really reducing the amount of sugar and caffeine that I was dependent upon. I didn't have a tremendous amount of processed foods, but I used sweet things, sometimes like sugar, and had addictions around that to help me continue to kind of push through things. As I healed, I realized what sugar was actually doing to my body, and also how I was using caffeine to push through situations when my body and my internal voice was really asking me to rest, and I wasn't permitting it to do so. And so what I did is began to take these types of foods out. I wasn't really big into processed foods, but I do see a lot of yogis who do, not necessarily cook for themselves, and they do lean into different sugary foods or processed foods. What I found is that in my journey, it was really important for me to begin to prepare my own foods and cook foods that were local, that were organic and seasonal. And as I began that journey, I began to feel much more better in my body, that I understood that there was a correlation to what I put into my body and how I was feeling. And I began to honor myself in a very different way, that my body is sacred, and what I put into it will also help me move in a different way, strengthen my body and my mind. And from a perspective, I'm very much focused on using, not being a vegan because I don't like to label like that, but having more of a plant-based diet. I do integrate lighter proteins, but I'm very much of the mindset of eating local and seasonally, and that's very aligned to Ayurveda. I'm also a big proponent of, when I talk about local, also eating wild plants, right? So there's a lot of local weeds in our environment that are very nutritious. Only, we can be eating the best food in the world, but we're only as healthy as our gut is healthy, right? So if our gut is out of whack and we're not able to properly digest and absorb and assimilate those nutrients, then we can be eating the most organic food. So what a lot of it comes down to is the gut. And so for me, a big practice that I integrate in addition to the types of foods that I eat is also this idea of what the Westerners called intermittent fasting, but from an Ayurvedic perspective is known as rhythmic eating. So we're keeping at least 12 to 14 hours from our last meal of the day to our first meal of the next day, and really avoiding having any types of snacks in between, so that we allow our digestive system to have that space to fully digest our food and absorb the nutrients, and then allow it to rest.
Very well said. So local, seasonal is, which is very, very good for the planet as well as for the human to survive upon and to get the best result of our health. As you mentioned, you do intermittent fasting, right?
Yes.
So what's your recommendation on the intermittent fasting? Is it, advisable for all the people, or is it based upon how does it suits to one's body, and or the person should experiment with himself whether it's suiting to its body or not?
Great question. So as I said, practice Ayurveda, and so one of the things that we use is understanding what our constitution is, what our dosha is, right? So where we have a tendency, so it's our body type, but it's not only our body type, it encompasses the way that we think, the ways that we move, and also the way that we eat. And what we do is look at where our imbalances are, right? All of us have imbalances in our life. And so we use that as a way to identify the tools to help us come back into balance and help us to heal. So in Ayurveda, there is the Kapha, the Pitta, and the Vata doshas. And so for each of them, depending upon what your imbalance is, would give us an indication of what the best type of rhythmic eating or intermittent fasting would be for that individual person. If someone has never intermittent fasted in the past, what I do recommend is taking a very slow approach. I believe in what we call a Kaizen approach, so taking small little steps. right? So if someone has never intermittent fasted before, maybe they can start with like 12 hours between the last meal of the day and their first meal the next day. And so that would be maybe they have a meal at 6 p.m. in the evening. That would be the last time they eat. They could, of course, have beverages like hot water or water, herbal teas, or even coffee without milk if that's something that they wanted to have in between that time. And then so 12 hours, they could maybe have their breakfast in the morning at 6 a.m. and then slowly begin to extend that. If someone has tried this type of eating before, then we might look directly at their imbalance. So for example, someone might have a vata imbalance, which is very popular in our culture today, being pulled in many different directions. They need a little bit more grounding, and say they need a little bit more stability. So for someone like a vata, for example, we might start out with a 12-hour and then maybe try to get it to a 14-hour fast in between. And then for someone like that, it's very important to have 3 meals a day, sometimes 4, something lighter in the afternoon, depending upon how much they move and how active they are in their lifestyle. So this is also something that we have to experiment with, and I encourage my clients to do that as well. We always have to be listening to our body, right? That's what yoga teaches us as well, is always honoring the inner signals of our body.
Very well said, very well. So what according to you qualifies as a pre or post yoga meals? What is your take on taking the pre or post yoga meals? Mm-hmm. And as in what nutrition do you look for into any meals that you recommend to your clients?
Okay, so pre-yoga, really I encourage people to have little amount of food in their stomach, maybe a beverage, if there's something that they need, maybe like a juice, for example, maybe a celery juice or a green juice, if you need to have that little boost in something, before, even after, sometimes having a juice. If you have eaten a meal prior, I'm a big believer that all of our meals need to represent the 6 tastes of Ayurveda. So, that helps us to reduce our cravings, right? So those 6 tastes we've all heard in the West Side, the sweets, the salty, and the sour, right? We all know those tastes, but they're less well known are the astringent, bitter, and pungent. Yes. And so again, we go back to the doshas, right? Mm-hmm. And understanding where our imbalances is, and then we can see what we need more of on our plate. But from more of a Western perspective, right? We want to make sure that we're having, a lot of greens and plants on our plate. We want to make sure that we have really good fat. Things like avocados, olive oil, sesame oils are really good. Olives are good as well. And then a lot of good ghee is good as well. And then making sure that we have maybe a lighter protein, right? Something that's easy to digest for our body.
Very nice to hear about that. How you combine Ayurveda with your yoga advices to your clients. So you make sure that you include all the 6 tastes as prescribed in the Ayurveda. So, here at Sattviko, we have this exciting range of pre and post yoga meals, such as antioxidant makhana, strengthening and endurance quick meals. Maybe you could have sometimes any of them.
Yes.
So as we come to the end of our interview, as I mentioned to you earlier, we ask our guests one tip or recommendation to our followers. So what would be that which you would want to give to our followers and listeners?
Yeah, one practice that I would recommend for your listeners is to, one of my mantras on a daily basis is pause, breathe, and then react. And I think that's something that yoga really taught me, was the power of the pause, and to take that breath and then decide, what is the next step that I'm going to take. Too often we're moving from one activity to the next without being conscious of what's actually going on, and that gives us this opportunity to do that and to digest.
Oh, that's really nice. So pause, decide, and act. That's really wonderful. Okay. Ivette, once we publish this interview, we are going to have more questions from our followers. So we may would like to invite you on a short question answer session, and you can probably share your valuable insight around the food and yoga aspect.
That would be wonderful. I'd be very grateful. Thank you for this opportunity.
So we would be organizing more such food yoga talks with the wonderful yogis around the globe. So we would love to hear from you. So you can either DM us, mail us, or comment below. Till then, bye-bye. Have a good day. And
All right. Thank you very much. You too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Namaste.
Thank you.